Today's guest is Meinl cymbals artist Richard Spaven. Richard is a drummer living in London who maintains that his whole style and outlook have been shaped by that particular city. Indeed, with its rich musical cross-cultures of breakbeat, techno, jazz, club, hip-hop, and much more, Richard was witness to the emergences of musical scenes that helped inform who he is as a musician today. And what a musician he is! Richard doesn't really play the drums so much as he floats in and around them. Like a pillow of air with a solid foundation in time and musicality, Richard's playing is thoughtful, serving to the songs, precise, inventive, and most of all fun. I first saw Richard at a Meinl drum festival a few years back, and I was struck by two things. First was his playing, of course, and second was his ever-present cap. I think you call it a snapback or a flipback. Anyway, it never seems to have any logos or designs on it. I'm not sure why, but I felt like his cap was synonymous with his drumming, tasteful and devoid of any solid associations, leaving the interpretation up to the other person. I recently spoke with Richard via WhatsApp between London and Nashville, and I have to say that it was one of the most enjoyable conversations I've had for Meinl Radio. Admittedly, his musical world is not what I'm steeped in, so I was a little bit nervous about doing the conversation with him. But after doing my research on him, I found that there were many questions I could ask him that, if lucky, would provide answers and dialogue that would transcend genres and would provide thoughtfulness and wisdom for any drummer anywhere. And I think that's exactly what he and I achieved throughout our conversation. What's more, speaking with Richard for an hour or so gave me a big hope that sooner or later I could sit down with him in person and have a few beers. He's just that kind of a guy. Lots of fun to speak with. So please, enjoy the podcast. I'd like to welcome everybody to the Meinl Radio podcast. We've got all the way over from, you're in London, right?
I'm in London, yeah.
Yeah, London, England. We've got Richard Spaven on the line. Richard, thank you so much for taking the time to chat.
It's an absolute pleasure. I can't say that I've got much better else to be doing right now, so thanks for having me on.
I feel bad laughing at that, but I'm going to laugh anyway.
Yeah, it's happy sad, really, isn't it? It's a double-edged sword, I think. There's definitely a side to it that's not funny being a musician right now.
No, it's not funny at all, actually. I think probably the only thing that keeps me laughing at the moment is your English sense of humor, so I'll blame it on that.
Well, if you're still laughing at the end of this, then we're doing okay.
Right on. So I have to ask, like, the first thing that really came to mind when I knew I was going to be doing a podcast with you, I need to know, is your outward sense of calm and restraint, is that a personal discipline that took you some time to achieve, or has that literally just been your natural disposition since birth?
Yeah, I'm probably not as calm as you think.
Really?
Yeah, you know, the duck all serene on the surface, and the feet are going like crazy underneath, you know.
So would you say that the like any kind of frantic manic thing is only happening internally? It's still not visible, but it's there?
Potentially there, yeah, but not always.
Got it.
Okay. It's there if I'm doing a drum show in front of 2,000 people. It's there probably, you know.
Oof. Yeah. Speaking of drum shows, I mean, that's something that, I mean, you really got doing in the last, few years? Or, I mean, maybe more than a few years, but it wasn't something you've been doing since the start of your professional career. What was the first drum show you did, and were you pretty nervous?
London Drum Show 2015, and it was probably the most nervous I've ever been for anything. But you're right, drum shows weren't something that I set out to do as a drummer, you know. It was... I waited until I was invited along to play at one. And that was, London Drum Show 2015.
So I assume that you said yes, like right away, but on the inside you were thinking, what did I just agree to do?
I needed a little bit of persuading, actually.
Really?
But I mean, it didn't take much. But I had it in my head all wrong that it would be, you know, that I wasn't the kind of drummer that should be doing those sorts of events. And the audience members might be there in a sort of judgmental state, and I couldn't have been more wrong about that, because it's introduced me to like a whole, the whole drumming community that, that we're talking to right now. It's just a huge sort of family affair of people who seem to just appreciate new influence and ideas and just getting together. It's an amazing scene, and we seem to be the only instrument that can hold that down. So I'm quite proud to be part of that.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Now, I have to ask, on your Bandcamp page, you've got some drumless tracks that people can, I think they're there for purchase.
Yeah.
Was that something that you decided to start doing after you were doing drum shows and you realized that would be kind of a valuable thing for people to be able to have?
I guess it's a parallel thing to that, yeah, just in terms of kind of releasing albums, and some of the people listening are drummers and want to sort of technically engage. And then I think it's nice to share that sort of, the aspect of what I'm doing, what it feels like to be me on my tracks for other people, seems like a nice thing to share.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you were an educator prior to doing these drum shows, correct?
Yes, correct.
And what sorts of drummers actually seek you out? Is it all types, or is there a guy that might be a little more in tune with the various genres that you're involved with?
Yeah, I mean, it tends to be people that have an awareness of, like a pre-awareness of what I do, and something in my playing tends to have just, affected them some way, hopefully positively. But a lot of the time it tends to be just a lot of talking about mindset and flow, and just how to sort of and sort of own style and stuff like that. There's all sorts of things that come up, but yeah, it tends to be people who are in search of kind of new ideas and kind of new ways to approach things,
Yeah, that's super cool. I figured it probably wouldn't be, you probably wouldn't have like a metal drummer knocking down your door, but the cool thing about what you do is, and you're even described this way often as being sort of genre-defying. So I feel like you're not being pigeonholed by any one drummer that may want to come to you and learn. And so I have a question about the genre-defying aspect of your music, which I tend to think is quite a good thing. In my mind, in recent years, there's been this great movement of music around the world that's just, you can't put a label on it. Do you call it world music? Do you call it jazz? Do you call it hip-hop? What do you call it? I'm not really sure, but I like the fact that it involves really good musicianship and really good songs, and quite the labor of love from people who make it. So my question is, I imagine that being in a genre-defiant sort of musical self, such as you are, is liberating. But has it ever worked against you in any concrete ways, at least in a business sense?
No, I don't think so. I mean, not unless I've been on some kind of extra kind of technical sort of session or something, like I did some orchestral stuff where it was just I was a bit out of my depth, just with the the old problem, classical conductors just don't count you in time, and it's like we can't handle that. But no, I wouldn't say that worked against me. I mean, I feel like my whole being is based on sort of being from London and just like absorbing genres until they sort of develop as musical tastes, but also as sort of playing disciplines and styles, and then also writing your own music. They'll blend together, and And it's like you say, there's a genreless aspect to that as well, which I find very liberating.
Mm-hmm. Is it ever been the case that I imagine it wouldn't be this way anymore, because this is more of an old school way of doing things, where artists are put inside, a box. I mean, if you think about it, back in the day at record stores, you would literally have sections. So there'd be the pop section or the country section or what have you. And so these days, really, it's not so much that way. And since you do things on Bandcamp, I imagine you have quite the control of your own. Anytime you've ever had to work with, or I should ask, have there ever been any situations where somebody else has been in charge of the financials of releasing music of yours, and they had an idea of who it should be marketed to versus yourself?
Anyone that I trust to release music that I'm close to would be on the same page in terms of who we're releasing it to.
That's a good answer. Sure. Yeah. That's cool.
That's not something to let someone with funny ideas run away with your music with some madness. No.
It's funny because there's such this kind of like cliche backlash against, a lot of people almost bemoan the lack of what you like, the traditional old school record company these days. But talking to you reminds me of all the benefits of taking matters into your own hands. And it sounds like in the type of business model we live in today that you thrive from it, versus where maybe back in the day where power was consolidated in the hands of few, it might have been a lot more difficult for you.
I mean, a fat advance and, bottles of Courvoisier lying around the studio, I could have handled that, I reckon.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we all could.
But probably would have got less done, but driven a nicer car, I'm just someone. I mean, I've worked in record shops growing up, and I collect a bit of vinyl, and it's the whole sort of record scene has just always been interesting for me. And like since my first release on my own, I sort of started to learn how to release a record myself. And it's like, with help with my label manager, we kind of learned how to do it ourselves. And it's quite a kick out of it, to be honest. Like, the Self is sitting there on Spotify with over 1 million plays and still going. And me and Eric, we just did that ourselves, and it's quite satisfying, that. And it's actually there's quite a buzz to sort of pushing your own music to people out there, as well as making it. So it's become a bit of a thing. Yeah.
So now the Self, that was the first release of yours, correct?
The first release of mine was a record called Spaven's 5, which came out 10 years ago. And 2 weeks ago, it got released on vinyl, which everyone is calling that a reissue because it's 10 years later. But actually, it's the issue because it's never been out on vinyl before. So it's just 10 years late on vinyl, that's all.
Interesting. And when your most recent album is Real Time, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
So if you look at Real Time versus your first release, which is not a reissue, it's the issue, what kind of a growth, what kind of a trajectory do you see as far as personal musical growth? Is it leaps and bounds? Is it slightly incremental? How do you classify it?
It's huge. It's a huge difference between the two, like in so many areas, like writing and production are big areas that have improved since then. I think for the Fives, it was a case of I was asked to do it by by a London-based label called Jazz Refreshed, and they were supporting the project. And that was a sort of case of like, okay, what am I gonna put on this record, you know? And I was fiddling around with beats, and I wasn't so good at sort of finishing things. So that was a good learning curve in terms of like finishing some music and presenting it. And the question of what that music was going to be was sort of up in the air until quite the sort of latter stages of the project, whereas The Self really was the first album that I stuck to the plan from before writing it to the completion stage. And that to me gave the album as a whole a strength that I can still hear in that record when I listen to it now. And that's something that sort of gives it it sort of stands the test of time, that sort of process. So that, I think you can only really learn that by doing it. Mm-hmm. So really the whole, you know, every album is a process, and a very personal one for me. And you learn from every time you do it. You know, I think, I mean, it's just such an experience. Just, I always say, you know, you build the house like brick by brick. It really is, for me, that's it's very hands-on, and it's like, it's very personal, and it just continues to be a really rewarding process. So, long may that continue.
Yeah, sure. Now, I imagine when Jazz Refreshed approached you about your first album, and you said you had a lot of unfinished beats and a little odds and ends that you had just had lying around, I imagine it wasn't a matter of you shopping yourself. They approached you. So did that surprise you when they reached out?
Yeah, it did. It did. Because I knew that they were kicking off this 5 series where everyone does 5 tracks. And then to get asked myself, you know, because I had no track record as a producer whatsoever. So that's where the surprise was for me. So yeah, it was a good kick up the backside, and it was the catalyst to the albums that followed, you know. So I'm grateful for them asking.
Would you say that Real Time is still, I mean, that was a 2018 release. Would you say that that's a still really good current representation of you musically at this point in your life?
I would, yep. Spin is, I mean, I think probably, I hope a lot of people who are listening know that tune. But, I mean, if you want to define me as a drummer, listen to the drum beat on Spin, and it's like, it's 160 BPM. The snares take you by surprise every time, because you're in a kind of an 8-bar loop, you know. So it's got that mechanical sort of edge to it, that sort of machine like, you know, bit of precision kind of a vibe to it, but it's also like a little bit out of the box, and it's a bit of a roller. It sort of relates to electronic music, but it's not electronic music because it's me playing, you know. So it's kind of, I would say that represents me pretty well, yeah.
I mean, I understand they're two completely different animals, but let's just say that life told you could do one thing or the other, and that's either play live or record. Which would you choose to do?
I was just going to say what great questions these were.
Hey, man, you know, I can't keep just swinging out the park. I got to come in with a real bomb sometime. I don't want to make you think, you know, I don't want to show you how awesome this could really be. I want to disappoint you a little.
When you say swing out the park, you're talking about cricket here, right?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, of course, of course. Oh man, I can't answer that, but I mean, what I will say is, like, I mean, the zone is my favorite place, you know, like the heightened state of concentration that we call the zone. And it's like when that happens on a gig, you know, and you feel like you and the band just all become one, and you just have the audience in the palm of your hand, and you're playing the best stuff that you've ever played in the most effortless way, whilst thinking about what you're going to buy in Tesco's tomorrow in your shopping list. Everything is so easy. And I guess in the studio it's kind of the same, but you feel like you're the Self, funnily enough, that take that I played is one of my favorite recordings that I've ever made, because everything fell into place for that. And so if you find the zone whilst you're in the studio, you feel like you're really sort of archiving things for for release and for people to hear, and you're laying something down in time. So this is all just me wriggling out of answering your question. I can't decide. Sorry.
No, actually, I think you gave I think you brought up a better point than what my question was. And that's really that it's not so much about where you are as what state you attain. Being in the moment, being present is a real kind of current trend is a bad word used for it. It's a mindset that's very celebrated these days. And I think you're just talking about being in the moment and being as best as you can be in that moment. Maybe by default, if you play more gigs than you do session work, you probably are able to attain the zone, be in the moment, just by default more frequently on a gig. And so like you say, since you don't do it as much in the studio, if you can get in the zone, it's a real, that's grabbing the brass ring right there.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you could buy a ticket for the zone, if you could decide when you were in it, I'd buy a lot of tickets.
Oh yeah, it's a good feeling.
Yeah, it really is. It's the best feeling, actually.
So kind of changing gears here. Here's a quote. I'm gonna have to do it. Here's a quote from an introduction that MikeDolbear.com had written about you. There was an interviewer for that site. Before he launched into the interview, he was writing some things about you, and I'm going to quote you here, and I want to find out if this is accurate or if this is the writer taking some extra creative license.
You're pitting me against Mike here. Is that what's happening?
No, against his writer, his nameless writer. I can't remember his name.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
So.
Wow, this is intriguing. Yeah, go on.
Okay, so he says, and I quote, "Comfortable in all possible genres, Spaven weaves a thread of jazz throughout each one, adding his personal note to every project while still maintaining the song at the front of the focus." Unquote. So my question is, comfortable in all possible genres, is that extra creative license on the writer's part, or is that accurate?
Well, that's not accurate.
Okay. Fire that guy. Fire him.
Like comfortable in a load of genres that are comfortable in a load of left field genres. There you go.
Got it. Because
I've edited it.
I mean, if he was including Norwegian black metal, I needed to know if this was a side of you we were not aware of.
That is a side to me that you're not aware of, that doesn't exist. Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier that you've got conductors for orchestras that just don't count you in on time, and so you've been at times a bit in over your head. Has there been moments like that where, I mean, after you've long been playing professionally and making your living at this, have there been moments where you just really swallowed hard and thought, "Oh, crap, what am I doing here?"
Like in a situation, you mean?
Yes, correct.
Not. I mean, I'm sure there have been those, yeah, but not so much anymore. As you get to be a bit more aware of what it is that you do really well, and you get better at putting yourself in the right situations and avoiding the wrong ones. I think that sort of develops as your career develops. There's sort of less chance of being in the really wrongest situations, but I've definitely had my fair share. Yeah.
Do you remember the first music that you heard that, I mean, I'm sure you do, of course you do, so please tell me, what was the first music that you heard that really resonated with you, where you felt like this is it, this is what was made for me?
I think it was hip hop. Like I'd heard music before that had an impact. Like when I was too young to sort of have my own taste in music, I was listening to Buddy Rich records basically, and that had an impact on me. You know, from as my teacher was a big band drummer, so I was sort of getting an awareness for that side of things. But there was definitely the light bulb definitely came on for hip hop. What would it have been, like Eric B and Rakim or something like that? It just felt so right, like Run DMC or whatever it was, whatever it would have been at the time. That was a definite, clear. This is, I'm on this side of the fence, you know.
Now, when I get into music, a certain at times in my life where I've gotten into something and really hard and it stayed with me, I tend to try and put myself in the shoes of the people that are making the music. I try and think about where they were, where they came up from, like their upbringing, how their geography affected the music that they made.
Yeah.
Did you tend to do that with hip hop? Did you sort of try and imagine where it came from?
Not so much geographically, but musically, I definitely did. In terms of, I sort of discovered a lot of records, a lot of jazz records, just from starting to appreciate jazz through the ears of a hip hop head, and sort of, you start, as soon as you trace back one break, then you've had it really. You're going to end up chasing them all, but like finding out where drum breaks or bits of jazz records have come from, that's kicked open so many doors of, going back and listening to original records and stuff. So yeah, I wouldn't say it was a geographical thing, but definitely definitely a stronger sort of relationship with jazz from coming, from hip hop.
Yeah, sure. Well, this kind of leads me into some other things I was going to ask you. The music that you play, being as all-encompassing of many genres as it is, it's this cool melting pot. And I understand you said a lot of what you do is, or maybe you in general, are informed by being a part of the London music scene, having grown up within it. That scene in and of itself, to me, it seems like it's enough to keep any ethnomusicologist busy for years, tracing the roots, the artists, the albums, the countries that influenced all of it.
Yeah.
So to be involved effectively, such as you are within the music that you play, to be as authentic as you are, you're saying basically you have to be kind of your own ethnomusicologist of sorts?
I'm saying you just, whatever it is, you need to genuinely absorb it, I think. And that means if you want to play drum and bass, then you don't watch drum and bass on YouTube for one evening and then go and play. You don't get any authenticity from doing that. You buy the records and you go to clubs and you move your ass to it and on a dance floor, and you just hear it on a big system, and you queue up to buy a white label of it or what. It's like you sort of be part of that scene really, and I think that's just been the case for me with so many scenes, so many of the scenes that I cite as influence. So I think that gives you just authority over basically what to play. I feel very entitled to play what I want because I have that sort of a proper strong background in so many genres of music.
Do you feel like it's possible to become a master of many genres, or do you feel like it's possible to be about a master of one, maybe two, and then competent in others? Given the fact that you have to really do all those things you said and give yourself over to that particular style.
Yeah, I think master of, a limited number of genres, really. I think that's what people want to hear, isn't it? When you're listening, is authenticity. So, yeah, there's people that can play many styles really well, but that to me is not the goal. It's to play however many. Who cares? Just like in your own way, really, and engage in the language and reinvent it and let that inspire you.
So, growing up in London, and growing up around house and hip hop, techno, everything that was a melting pot in the scene that you grew up in. So there was a thing that went on for a while at the Blue Note in London called the Sunday Sessions Club Night. It was held by the Metalheads label, which I assume had a pretty big effect on you.
If I just turn my head to 15 degrees to the left, there's a huge, like a framed poster of DAT tapes from Metalheads, of all of those classics. So yes, I like where this question is going. Carry on, Chris.
Okay, so my question is, were you part of that? Did you go to those Sunday sessions? Were you able to see those and be witness to it?
I went to those, yeah. That was, we all know the feeling, right? When you go to a gig and you feel like you absorb so much inspiration that you walk out and you're sort of buzzing from it. Or sometimes you see those players and they make you feel like you almost don't know what you sound like after you've heard them, because you've sort of taken so much from it, and you walk out and you feel that inspiration for days. I used to walk out of the Blue Note feeling like that after listening to records, and it's something that's just stayed with me. Even now, that there's an era of drum and bass that just hasn't dated for me, and a lot of it is on that in this poster that I'm looking at. Yeah.
What would the time frame of that have been?
The sort of golden era of Metalheads was like 96, 97, and that was your sort of like Source Direct, Photech, Groove Rider, Codename John, like I can just read them off the wall actually, like Dillinger. There was a real oh man, it was such a vibe down there. It was unbelievable just to hear that music on such a great sound system like that was an experience that I'm still talking about, because it still has like a relevance for me in the way that I play drums.
Now, would you come home from those sessions? And I'm not sure if you were able to at that time of the night, but were you able to come home and play drums right away, or did it have to wait until the next day?
It would wait until the next day, yeah.
And when you sat down to play, did you feel like did that inspiration really move you, at least for that one particular practice session? Did that move you to some heights you'd emotionally or sound-wise that you felt like you had not yet achieved before? I mean, it could come down again, like the next session you might, who knows, you might suck again. But for that one, you had such a buzz. Do you know where I'm going with this? Did it just leave you feeling like, wow, that just pushed me to a new level?
It actually didn't. I wish I had a better answer to this, but it didn't. It actually took a little while to start to really draw direct parallels with drumming. It was like I was so into it musically that I kind of just absorbed it for a while, and then it took a while before I really started to kind of work out breaks and sort of transcribe stuff and get into it in that way. But it's really just the inspiration, like I say, that is still, and the sort of relevance. I think it was so strong at the time that it just remains relevant even now. So, I mean, I definitely, like I said, transcribing and I think what it was doing was it was sort of embedding that sort of machine-like approach into my playing as well, which I really enjoy playing in that way. Which by the way is not to replicate a sampler. I'm not trying to do that. I'm trying to play in a way that you might not know that it's a live drummer or a sampler, but I'm not limiting myself by doing that, by just sticking to one loop and playing it over and over again. We are human and we can make minute decisions and add embellishments and do other things, and chuck it about and make decisions that samplers might not make. So it's not a limiting thing. It's kind of just part of the makeup of what I think is maybe my kind of approach.
That's interesting. Well, I have to ask too, so talking about really giving yourself over to the music and immersing, becoming a master, in your case, and in anybody's case that does that, it's basically out of pure love. How much of a tip of the hat, how much acknowledgement did the London music scene, because I literally have no idea, so I'm curious, how much acknowledgement did the London music scene give towards some of the origins of these styles? So like say with breakbeat, you've got the most, I mean, I don't know if it's this or the funky drummer, but you've got the amen break from the Winstons. And it's, people would debate which one's the most sampled drum beat ever. Is it the amen break or is it the funky drummer? But anyway, let's just talk about the amen break. So how much acknowledgement did people give towards that break or the group that spawned it through their song Amen Brother? Or was that one of those things that it just wasn't really known unless you dug super, super deep?
I think that was just a heads digger thing. It wasn't necessarily like a appreciation thing. I mean, let's mention his name because it never gets mentioned. DC Coleman, the guy who played those few seconds of improvised groove that kind of changed music, in London only through about four different genres, So yeah, DC Coleman, tip of the hat, definitely.
Crazy enough, the guy, when he died homeless I think in Atlanta. It's pretty criminal. Zero publishing rights throughout all of his life to that particular song that in one way, shape, or form helped make a lot of other people money. It's kind of the age-old cliche. It's not funny. It's pretty sad. But yeah, I mean, what the guy did, holy cow. I find it interesting too that like the way that things, some people when they talk about history, they'll talk about a red letter date, and that's to them what history is. But to me, it's all those million little swirling circumstances that kind of come together to make that red letter date. And so you had Coleman with the Amen break. He did Amen Brother, did that one break in the song that ended up being used, I think, on it was a compilation record from a DJ in New York City that found it and then put it on a compilation record for all these other DJs to use. And then NWA ends up using it and they slow it down. It's kind of crazy how all these things, they travel across oceans, they find their way, and here we are talking about this style of music that you love that came from, I mean, I don't know, it's not just from this one break. I mean, you've also got techno in Detroit, You've got music from parts of India that have made their way into what you play. Like West Indian music somehow is probably involved. Um,
Yeah,
correct me if I'm wrong.
yeah. Well, um, so much West Indian influence, like in London, that we wouldn't have half the music that we have, without that culture.
Yeah. And is it? Have you ever traveled in the states much for work?
Yeah, yeah. I've done it's like six weeks around the States on a bus. Yeah, I've done that. Eating out of Cracker Barrels way too often.
Was that with Jose James?
That was with Guru.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you travel the states, I mean, I understand you're on tour. It's off time is not something you really get. Did you ever have moments traveling around the states where you made any kind of like, if you had a day off or you had a chance to you were in one of the cities where something went down? Did you ever try and make a pilgrimage to like a site or a place where something happened that was part of the music you grew up with, that like sort of informed the music you grew up with?
Wow, that's a good question. Um, I mean, I don't know. I don't have a good answer. I mean, I've been to the States a lot with Jose James, and there was a period of kind of staying in New York for, we were recording, so I was there for like a good month. And I mean, we went to the Vanguard, but I can't really call it a pilgrimage, to be honest. But I'm just trying to think of, no, I can't polish up an answer for you in time.
It's
Sorry,
okay.
Chris.
Pilgrimage might be kind of a romanticized term for what I'm talking about. More like, and maybe this is just me being a complete nerd, but I'm the guy that when I can, I'll go to. If I can drive in front of Muddy Waters' old house in Chicago and check it out, just drive by it and see it. I'll do it,
Yeah.
just to see. Hey, that's where that guy. That's where he lived most of his life, or oh, that's the train station where he came up from Mississippi on, or something like that. I'm the nerd that actually does that, so
Okay.
that's why I ask.
That's good to know about you, Chris.
What, that I'm a nerd?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm curious, with all the current horse hockey that's going on in the world today, how have you been handling the downtime from gigging?
Um, um, well, basically just going headfirst into just making records. That's been an amazing. It's been a great time for that, and also appreciating the fact that a lot of people have been too sick or not made it through this, and it also keeps things in perspective, in terms of how lucky we are to be able to sit around and make records. So yeah, it's been a mixture of things. I'm hoping as as a society that we all learn a bit from this as well, about just people take a lot of things for granted these days, and so there's been that sort of aspect to it as well. But in terms of me getting through on a daily, it's been full on writing and recording for a few projects actually, but mainly my own next release.
When do you think we can see your next release?
November, hopefully.
And is the primary spot to find it and download, to buy it and support you? Would that be on Bandcamp?
That will be on Bandcamp, yeah. Yeah.
So, okay, go ahead, sorry.
Well, potentially on a label, this one, which is big news for me. After what we were talking about, staying independent earlier on, but potentially releasing this next record on Apollo Records, which is the subsidiary label to R&S, which has quite a track record of classic electronic records. So hopefully that'll be a good home for my music. So we shall see.
Dude, here's your shot at Cavassier in a new car. I hope it comes true for you.
I need a new car regardless of whatever's going on with the record deal. So that's,
Well, so that's what I want to tell people. Here's your shot at some shameless self-promotion, Richard. So please let everybody
not very good
out
at
there.
Self-promoting.
Oh, here you go. You
set me up. Go and pass me one.
Okay, you need to tell everybody where they can go and not stream but buy music of yours. Where can that be had?
Well, Bandcamp is the best place to do that, or your local record shop, I would say, if you're a vinyl person. Did just make a nice release, actually. Here you go. I'm just going to go for the shameless plug, but there's a pianist in London by the name of Alpha Mist who's he's really well known. He does his own thing in a straightforward kind of way that I respect, and he's a great player. And we made a project together which is very kind of hip hop and broken beat influenced, and that came out about a few weeks ago, basically from when we were recording this anyway. And that's just a really good example of some of these influences that we've been talking about in terms of sort of broken beat and techno and sort of electronic influence, but in what's essentially acoustic music. So 44th Move is the name of that project. So that can be purchased on Bandcamp or stream it or whatever you want, but stick the headphones on and enjoy it.
So 44th Move is the name of the band?
44th Move is the name of the band, yeah.
Okay, and Alphamist was the name of the pianist that's in the band.
That's right, yeah.
So I have to ask, you've worked with Bill Lawrence, another pianist in the past, right?
Yeah.
And I'll throw it out there, not that it really matters to anybody, but one of my favorite musicians to come out of the whole Snarky Puppy camp actually has been Bill Lawrence. So what I want to know is the way I hear him recorded, I want to know if live he sounds like this as well, because I've not seen him in that kind of a setting. So you tell me. When he plays, I almost hear like a piano sound, like from what old recordings of piano sound like, where it almost sounds like it's sort of got this beautiful tone to it, but almost like the keys, when he hits them, it's almost a little struck almost a little too hard to where it kind of distorts a little bit in the old microphones. He just sounds like an old-time pianist to me in a kind of a way. Does that make any sense at all to you?
No. But I think if you come to London, I can drive you past his house, and I can show you the train station where he got the train once arriving from Manchester. How does that sound?
That sounds like first he needs to like die and be a legend, and then I'll do that.
Oh, so it's only dead legends you do that for?
I'm only into dead legends. Live people, they can go spit. Did you know that Bill was in an HBO miniseries years ago?
What? No, I didn't know this, no.
He played a German soldier in the Second War. There's an HBO miniseries called Band of Brothers, and it's produced by Tom Hanks and I think Steven Spielberg. Well, Tom Hanks at least. It's part of his Playtone Productions company, and it came out in maybe 2000, and it was based off of a few different books that were written by some people who basically their experiences in the Second War over in Europe. And at one point in the scene in Bastogne, the freezing winter in Bastogne, when the Americans are lined up against the Germans, one of the German soldiers that gets caught is Bill Lawrence.
So you're telling me he's a German?
He is. He's not really. He's not really English.
I've seen the sequel to that. It's called Saving Private Lawrence. Have you seen that?
Yes. Yeah.
Fantastic film.
I know. It's great. That's funny.
Oh, dear.
Yeah. So I think we should probably end here on some really good sarcasm.
Yeah.
Man, thank you.
Yeah, it's only going to go downhill from here otherwise.
It really will. Richard, thank you so much for being on the podcast, man. I certainly do appreciate your time.
Chris, mate, thank you for such enlightened questions. It was like total pleasure talking to you, man. Thank you.
Yeah, man. Thank you. Thanks for listening to Meinl Radio. If you liked this episode, please head over to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and leave a review. We would appreciate it very much. Thanks, and we'll see you soon.